All right, Hebrews chapter 11. Well, we talked about the patriarchal age, the primeval age, and the patriarchal age is where we are right now, talking about the patriarchs and how God used them here in chapter 11. And when we talk about this present age that we're in, well, I guess you can start out really with the present age, because it starts out with us. It starts out, we, the people, it's us that God can use. And He's given all these other things for His examples for us to follow. And faith begins by grasping this one great, basic, essential fact. And there's a true and there's a living God that we all should go out and seek, and then take what He says at heart. That's basically it. And now we talked about Noah last time, that he is faith witnessing aright. Faith witnessing aright. And he is one doing something that no one else had done before, and telling people that something's going to happen that no one has ever seen before. And so Noah was mindful of the Word of God. He was moved by the fear of God. He was mighty in the service of God. And he was marked as a child of God. Now, we're going to move on to the patriarchal age in verse 8. And it starts off, and it shouldn't surprise anybody who it starts off with. It starts off with Abraham. And it says, by faith Abraham, when he was called to go out into a place which he should after receive for an inheritance, obeyed, and he went out, not knowing whither he went. By faith he sojourned in the land of promise, as in a strange country, dwelling in tabernacles with Isaac and Jacob, the heirs with him of the same promise. For he looked for a city which hath foundations, whose builder and maker is God. Through faith also Sarah herself received strength to conceive seed, and was delivered of a child when she was past age, because she judged him faithful who hath promised. Therefore sprang there even of one, and him as good as dead, so many as the stars of the skies in multitude, and as the sand which is by the seashore innumerable. These all died in faith, not having received the promises, but having seen them afar off, and were persuaded of them, and embraced them, and confessed that they were strangers and pilgrims on the earth. For they that say such things declare plainly that they seek a country. And truly, if they had been mindful of that country from whence they came out, they might have had opportunity to have returned. But now they desire a better country, that is, an heavenly. Wherefore God is not ashamed to be called their God, for He hath prepared for them a city. By faith Abraham, when he was tried, offered up Isaac, and he that had received the promises offered up his only begotten son, of whom it was said, that in Isaac shall thy seed be called, accounting that God was able to raise him up, even from the dead, from whence also he received him in a figure. By faith Isaac blessed Jacob and Esau concerning things to come. By faith Jacob, when he was dying, blessed both the sons of Joseph, and worshipped, leaning upon the top of his staff. By faith Joseph, when he died, made mention of his departing of the children of Israel, and gave commandment concerning his bones. So we're going to start, I'm going to end the reading there. There's a lot of verses there, a lot to cover there. And you know me in covering Bible verses, we don't get very far. Because, I was always one of these preachers. When I was a young preacher boy, Brother John, I'm sure you remember this. I used to be able to listen to preachers, and they'd get out and say, okay, turn your Bibles to this, and they'll have one verse, and then they'll speak an hour. And I'm saying to myself, how did they do that? You know, that's what I was like, how do they do that? And now I understand how they do it. And so, you know, and you grow into that. It's not something that just happens, okay? But anyway, let's give a background of Abraham. Abraham's the greatest star. When I say star, I'm talking about of the Hebrews, in the thoughts and the minds of Hebrew people, because he's Father Abraham. He's the one that's the father of faith and father of the nation. That's what God called him to do. He says, out of thee shall all the nations of the earth be blessed. And certainly the United States is one of those nations that have been blessed because of God. And but here the first thing that we see about Abraham is faith counting on the promises of God. Faith counting on the promises of God. Abraham, faith. Let's look at the first thing about Abraham. Put this thing. Faith is, or with an impossible call. Faith with an impossible call. Now, we look at it as impossible. But remember, wherever God leads you, God's going to prepare for you and provide for you, wherever that is. You won't see God's people begging for bread. God's going to take care of his own. And because he's promised to do that. He says, but my God shall supply all, not most, not some, but all your need according to his riches and glory by Christ Jesus. So we know we're going to have all of our needs, provided for. But we got to have faith and believe it. That's the key. You might want to write this down. And I got a couple things coming up that are good things. I don't know how in the world I come up with them, but they're good. But when they shock me, they ought to shock you. Because they shock me sometimes. And but you are limited only by your faith. You're limited only by your faith. And the reason that you look back in the past and you read about these guys in chapter 11, and then you go back in even church history and you read about people who have done great things. Well, stop and look how they did great things. They stepped out on nothing and by faith did it.
So you're saying we don't exercise our faith?
That's correct. That's right. You're limited by your faith, by how much faith you have. And that is by how you exercise it. If you have faith, you're going to exercise it. You're going to have faith, you're going to use it. It's like, having something and not using it is no good, It is no good at all. So we can look at Abraham and look at this in the first thing. In verse 8, by faith Abraham, when he was called to go out into a place where he should, after receive for an inheritance, obeyed, and he went out, not knowing whither he went. Now, today, we all would want, okay, God, you want me to go to Tallahassee, Alabama. All right? Now, I remember that call 30 years ago. Here it is, and I don't know, some of you have never heard this, so I'll tell you. 30 years ago, I was a seminary student at Temple Baptist Seminary in Chattanooga, Tennessee, and I was pastoring a little mission church in Scottsboro, Alabama, that I drove 1 hour to go do every Sunday morning, every Wednesday night, and did visitation on Saturday. So it was a Saturday I was there, Sunday I went back, Wednesday I went, and I pastored that little church. And I had already graduated from college, and I was praying that God would put me in the ministry somewhere, and I was looking for a church. So I put in applications, or not applications, but you send resumes. I sent resumes to churches and a bunch of churches. I don't know how many resumes I sent out, but I sent out a heap of them. And I wasn't hearing back from any of them. And the ones I did hear back, but a few of them. But the ones I did hear back from, and that's just where I always get this, those churches wanted a 20-year-old pastor with 50 years of experience. That's what they wanted. They wanted somebody that was young, energetic, but yet had a lot of experience. Well, those two just don't happen. They're just not there. Okay? That's it. They don't exist. So I wasn't getting anywhere. All right, because here I am. The only thing I've pastored is a little mission church. I'm 20 some years old. a baby, still wet behind the ears, as many people would think of it. And so here it is, you know. So finally, I went to see my mentor, and that's Dr. Lee Robertson. Well, Dr. Lee Robertson, to the Independent Baptist Church movement, is a lot like General Robert E. Lee was to the Confederacy and the war between the states. Okay? So he was very, very, very widely known in independent circles. Of course he would be, right? Because he was almost single-handedly, with him and a couple others, the founder of the Independent Baptist movement. So I went to Dr. Robertson. He was my mentor. I knew him personally. I was on first-name basis with him. I'd had him in my church in Scottsboro. He and I were very close. And so I went to Dr. Robertson, and Dr. Robertson asked me. He said, how's the search for a church going? I said, well, that's why I'm here. I said, it's not going. I said, I've sent resumes to, I don't know, 20, 25 churches. And I said, and I told them what I told you. I said, they want a young man 20 years old with 50 years experience. And he just laughed, and he says, yeah, they don't know what they want. that was Dr. Robertson. I mean, he just throw it out there. And he says, you know, he says, I know of 5 churches right now that need pastors. And he says, and what I'm going to do is that I'm going to write a personal letter I'm going to attach your resume to it and personally recommend you to these 5 churches. Let's see what happens. Man, he had prayer with me. I left, and I said, woo, here it goes. I'm going to have me 5 churches that want me. You know how many we heard from the churches? Zip. Not one. Not one. I was shocked. He was shocked. He says, I don't know. He says, I don't know what to tell you. He said, well, just pray. God's got somewhere for you. We prayed. He prayed. I prayed. And finally, I was at work, and this church here, the pastor, the former pastor, Brother David Barrentine, who's with the Lord now, this church was having a problem finding somebody to come that was young and that wanted to pastor it. Miss Joan, you probably remember some of this. You're the only one probably in here that wouldn't remember that. And so he was actually, he resigned as pastor and stayed as interim. Okay? Well, the problem with that was the church wasn't looking for a pastor because he was their interim. He recognized that, so he resigned from everything. He said, no, I ain't going to preach for you anymore. He said, because you're not looking. So he resigned from everything. So they called him and said, look, we're in an impasse. What do we do? Where do we go? He said, the only thing I know is call the development office at the school and put it out there that y'all need a pastor. So they did. They called the development office, and at that time, Dr. Jim Lilly, who's another dear friend of mine, was the director of the development office at Tennessee Temple. And when he just wrote it down on a scratch piece of paper. The name of the church, the guy that called, which is David Barrentine, and he was the former pastor, and you need to call him to get the number of the chairman of the pulpit committee. So he called me down at I was working for the school. He called me. We called the school office, the office I worked for, and they called me. Said, you need to go by the development office, see Jim Lilly. So I did. All that makes sure. He come out the door. When he saw me pull up, he come out the door. He said, I got to church. That's what he said, because he'd been helping me too. He said, I got to church. He says, this guy called me. He told me day. He said, you got to call him. He's the former pastor. But he's going to give you the name of the chairman of the pulpit committee. I said, okay, fine. So I called the guy right off the bat. I said, man, I'm excited. So I called the guy right off the bat. And I talked to Brother David. He's the first one I ever talked to here. And he told me about the church, told me how he started the church, told me why he started the church, told me the whole history of the church, told me everything about the church. And he says, I started the church and the church died under me. I mean, he admitted it. He just told me everything. And he says, I'm not a church builder. Really, David was a teacher, more of a teacher than anything. Great at that, super at that. And so I said, okay, well, I understand it. He said, now this is the guy you need to call. He'll schedule you to come preach. So I called Brother Aaron Griffith. Now, people don't know Brother Aaron. He's been dead a long time ago. He passed away, okay? Now, Brother Aaron was chairman of the pulpit committee. So I called him. First question out of his mouth was, when can you come preach? I said, man, I can come today. You know, that's where I was in the thing. I said, I can come today. You know, this is it. You know, and I knew the church. So I did. I came the next Sunday, and I preached. I preached, and I think we had 5 people is what we had, about 5 people that first Sunday. And that I came here. We were in a little bitty building back there in the back, and 5 people. And I said, man, this is tiny. You know, that's what I was thinking. You know, and I was looking around. He gave me a tour of the town and, you know, and all this. And I was looking at all these churches. And I said, goodness, you got 50 churches in this town. And you got 5 people. You can't cut a pie but so many times. You know, who you going to get to come? You know, so I'm thinking, I'm you know, devil getting in my brain, you know. So anyway, I left. And, well, I left that next Monday. I stayed with them that night, drove back Monday morning. And Monday morning I got up. And he told me, he said, we had a meeting last night after church. I said, yeah, I know y'all met. And he says, I'm going to go ahead and tell you, you might well go ahead and pray about coming. I said, okay, well, fine. He said, we're going to meet and have church. We're going to have a business meeting. I said, okay, fine. So we drove back. Tina and I talked and had Cody with us. He was just a little fellow. You remember that, don't you, Miss Jones? Just a little fellow. We drove back and we talked. And I said, well, what do you think? And she said, well, it's got a Walmart, so I'm all right. You know, she didn't know at the time it was the world's smallest Walmart. She didn't know that. And but as long as it had a Walmart, she was fine. And so anyway, another week went by, and I got a call. And Brother Aaron, he called me. He says, church met, voted, and wanted you to come as pastor. I said, what was the vote? He says, 100%. I said, okay. How many voted? He said, 7. I said, okay. And I said, at least I got 100% of 7. We're doing pretty good, okay? Because, so here it is. You get a kid virtually that is leaving everything that has been established to something really unknown. Because when they called me as pastor, they told me, they said, we understand that we can't afford to pay you full time. We understand that you'll have to take a job and work to take care of your family. We understand that. And we'll raise you up as soon as we can. I said, okay, that's fine. I didn't make the decision on money. I didn't even ask them what they're going to pay me. I didn't know I was going to take a drastic cut and pay, but I did. But the good thing was they moved me into a house I didn't have to pay for. So that was a good thing. So that took a lot of the thing off. And finally we got in here, and I really got to thinking. In the first week, as I was thinking and riding around town trying to learn everything and doing all that, I said, Lord, what have I done? You know. I said, I don't know what to do. I don't know how I'm going to make it. I don't have anybody to call on because I don't know anybody. And Lord gave me peace about it. He says, look, I didn't send you down there to forsake you. I haven't forgot about you. And I'm going to take care of you. Amen. And make a long story short with that, he did and has. And does. And but what I'm saying is, God oftentimes doesn't give you a road map on how it's going to work. I didn't have a road map. I didn't have a written contract by anybody saying, okay, in 5 years this, and 10 years this, and if something happens, we're going to let you retire, and this will be it. I didn't have all that. I didn't have no contract. I didn't have no agreement. The only thing I had was a church that voted me to come in as pastor with 7 people. That's all I had. And I left and moved everybody that was close to me down here. Now, I use myself as an example because that's a lot what happened to Abraham. God told him to pick up everything you've got and leave the place and the only place that you know. And go to a place. The only difference between me and Abraham was I knew where I was going. I didn't know how to pronounce the name of the town, but I knew where I was going. And but Abraham didn't even know where he was going. How are y'all like that? All right, y'all get up, y'all get in there and load up everything, Brother David, and load the truck up. Y'all get in the car and just get on 85 and head north. And when it's time to stop, I'll tell you. Now, how would you like that? Now, that'd be something, wouldn't it? Question is, how many people would do that? Not many. Because, again, we want to know, well, wait a minute. How am I going to take care of my family? Where am I going to work? Where am I going to live? How's this going to work? We want everything planned out. That's not faith. Faith is you don't know. You got me?
Yes, sir.
You don't know. And that's the whole thing about Abraham and this example that we have and here of this impossible call. Faith appeals to the immediance of faith. Abraham was already a worshiper and he believed God. And one thing I read in here that really moved me is look at verse 15. And truly, if they had been mindful of that country from whence they came out, they might have had an opportunity to have returned. Now, I got to thinking about that. Put myself in that position again. Okay, and again, I'm just using myself as an example. Coming here, staying here a week or two, a month, I'll look at Tina and say, look, this ain't working, let's go back to Chattanooga. I couldn't go back. I didn't have no affection there. Job was already gone. House already gone. Her job already gone. There was no going back, you see. And so as so if you're in love with something, it's opportunity of going back to that something. And so faith not only is starting out going where you don't know where you're heading or how you're going to do it, but it's also a point of no return. You got me? There's no return. In other words, when you step out and go, that's it. There is no backwards. It's all forward. And too many Christians today have too much that they can rely on and don't have to rely on God. Yeah, we're too comfortable. That's the reason. Let me use another illustration real quick, and I know I'm running out of time, but I think they're good, and they illustrate the point. Why are these third world pastors in India, Pakistan, Kenya, and these other third world nations, not developed nations, but third world nations, out in the bush? Brother John's been to the bush. I ain't never been to the bush. Now, I've been out in the middle of nowhere, but I don't think I've been to the bush like he has. You've been out there with the tigers and the lions, haven't you, brother? And the chickens on the motorcycle. I never rode a motorcycle with a chicken on it. But I've read some things over there that I said, man, let's get out of here. But never a motorcycle with a chicken. But how are those guys able to do what American pastors and American churches are unable to do? Is it they got a different God that has different power? No. Is it they got a different Bible and they got a different message? No. Is it because they're just better at it than we are? No. They don't even have half the resources that we have. They don't have the money. They don't have the knowledge. They don't have a lot that we have. The training, anything. How are they able to do it better than anybody in America is doing it? Because that's all they've got. That's all they do. That's their passion.
Amen. That's it.
And they don't know anything different then that's what God told me to do, and I'm going to do it. And they do it, and as a result, you can go out and just drive down a road in India, and I'm sure there's other places. You can drive down the road. I remember one time Brother John and I were going to a church to meet a pastor, just pray with him, not church service. And this church was out in the middle of nowhere. I'm talking about nowhere. Where do the people come from? I don't know. They must be living down under the branch somewhere, because I don't know. I didn't see any people. But they come. Here it is. We can go into a metropolitan area of America, start a church, and nobody comes. What's the difference? Can you say faith? That's the difference. They believe. They believe just because God said it. And they don't have all the distractions to pull them away that we've got over here. And that's the same way that people sitting in the church. I can't go to church because I got to work on Sunday. Because if I don't work on Sunday, I can't get everything done. And I can't go to church because I got to do this on Sunday because I don't have time. Again, it's a time factor. Everybody's bidding for our time. Well, if you don't have time to go to church, you certainly don't have time to exercise faith. So we're limited by the exercise of our faith. I'll go back 15 years ago and tell you a story that's there. When I first stepped out with plans to say, okay, how many of you remember, how many were in the old building, back down in the old building? Raise your hand real high, several of you, okay? You know how crowded it was. I'm talking about there'd be families that would come in and visit with us, have 4 or 5 people. They couldn't even sit together because there wasn't a place for 4 or 5 people to sit. So guess what? They never came back. And we did that for how many years? 3, 4, 5? And finally, the stubborn pastor at that time, being me, okay, God was telling me, okay, you need to build. I'm saying, wait, hold up. God, wait a minute. I just don't think you know where we are here. We're not in Montgomery. This is Tallahassee. We're not in Auburn. This is Tallahassee. You're talking about going into a major, and then I got Brother Wayne. He come in here and drew these plans, and I'm saying, goodness, can't you draw something smaller? I argued with God about it for a while. And finally, I got to thinking, I said, if we don't step out and do something, we're going to start going backwards. So finally, hard-headed preacher got his head on pretty well straight, stepped out, told the church this is what we need to do, and they say, okay, how much is it going to cost? Oh, we're talking about $700,000. Church ain't never hardly been in debt in its life. We're talking about $700,000. After church that day, I already had 2 people come up to me and say, preacher, can't be done. Now, what do you think that did to the preacher? It solidified what I was already thinking and told God, God, this ain't Montgomery, this ain't Auburn, we can't do this. That's what it solidified in my brain. But I knew it had to be done. So we went ahead with it. I got taught during the year process of building this building more about faith in that 1 year than I had learned prior to that and since then. And I'm going to tell you this story. If I got up in the pulpit every Sunday, those of y'all remembered it. I got up in the pulpit every Sunday, boy, and I was taunting the positives of everything. We're going to do this thing. We're going to have this thing. We're raising money. We're going to be all right, and everything's going to be good. I didn't believe a word of it. But I have to keep the people pumped up, right? I'm down in the hole, how are we going to do this? This is a lot of money. I mean, this ain't chicken feed money. This ain't the $10,000 we borrowed on the church van. This ain't the $50,000 that we borrowed to build a Sunday school building. This is $700,000. I was walking out front, and construction zone out here in the front. All of it was open, just a construction zone out front. I was walking out there, and a guy drove up. He come out there, and he says, "Hey, Brother Rick." I told him how we had, all that kind of stuff. We had our greetings. He says, "I ain't seen the building. I want to see the building." So I walked through the building. I showed him the building, went back, showed him the old building. He says, "Do you have any plans on this building?" I said, "Oh, yeah, I got the plans in here in the room." So I went in there and showed him the plans and all that kind of stuff. And he says, "How much is this costing the church?" I said, "Well," I said, "fortunately, we've been able to raise about $250,000 to $300,000, I said, before we started building. And I said, we're going to have to still borrow about $400,000. I said, to finish. I said, because that's just what we said. We're going to be in debt for, he said, so you're going to be in debt for about $400,000. I said, yeah. He says, I tell you what I'm going to do. I've got some stock in a company. He says, I can't liquidate it right now, but he says, as soon as I can transfer that stock, and it'll probably take me 6 months, he says, I'm going to give the church enough shares to pay off the $400,000. Wow. I didn't believe that guy. This can't be real. Nah. 6 months went by. I ain't seen hide nor hair of this guy. He done left town. I don't know I don't know where to find him. Because what do? You're going to lie to me. You know. A couple months later, he come back by, and he says, I ain't forgot about it, but yet they've put some stipulations on me transferring stock. I can't transfer it yet, but as soon as I get to the point, I'm going to transfer the stock. Long story short, a year and a half later, he comes to me. He says, I finally got it done. Stock's going to be transferred. And he says, the stocks are worth this much. I'm going to transfer this many shares. And he says, that should pay your debt off when you can liquidate the stock. I said, okay, fine. So I got it. I ain't never had a stock share thing before. I didn't know what to do with it. I had to take it somebody did. I didn't know anything about it. So we got to thinking about it. I got looking at stock. Then finally, guess what? The company's going to be bought out. They were in a buyout. The company that was going to buy them had already offered to buy all the stocks, the shares that's out there for X amount of dollars. So he comes back to me. And he says, look, I know those stocks that I gave you, they were worth this much. He says, but if you don't sell them now, you're going to have to hold on to them for 10 years. They won't let you share, won't let you sell. He says, so my suggestion is, even though it's not going to be worth as much, go ahead and liquidate the shares and let them buy them. So he did. $185,000 is what that amounted to. Yeah. Amen. Can you say faith? Yeah. Just do what God tells you to do, and it'll do it. I got a call from a businessman in this town that picked me up. He said, Brother Rick, where are you? He's never stepped a foot in this door of this church. Till this day, has never stepped a foot in the door in this church. He said, where are you, Brother Rick? I said, I'm going down Gilmer. He said, stop by the office. He says, I'm not in town. He said, but there's an envelope on my desk with your name on it. You need to get that envelope. I said, okay. So I went to the office, told the secretary. She went in there and got the envelope, gave it to me. I got in the truck. I opened it up. It was a check for $2,500. Went to the mailbox, another check, $5,000. And I'm talking about God will supply. That's what faith is. Amen. Faith, you step out and do what God tells you to do, God will take care of it. Amen. That's the reason we were able to take a $385,000 debt and retire it in 38 months. Amen. And even the bank asked me how we did it. I said, we didn't do it. God did it. Amen. That's faith. God bless you.